One of my more controversial beliefs in the brand space is that if you lead the horse all the way to the water, they will never drink. You've got to get them about halfway there. Your brand needs to deliver about half of the aspiration that something magical, meaningful, and memorable will happen at your location. And then actually the rest has to happen to them.
Welcome back to the Turndown. Today we're diving deep with Brad Steward, a true original. Brad isn't your typical hotelier. He's a former pro snowboarder who helped bring the sport to the global stage. A film school grad, a marketing guru who worked with brands like Sims, Bonfire Snowboarding, and Amer Sports. Now he is the co-founder of Caravan Outpost, a place Forbes says big hotel chains should worry about. Brad believes in creating magic moments, not just selling beds. He's all about authenticity, connection, and letting guests build their own experiences. Forget marketing, Brad creates what's real. Get ready to hear from a guy who says, I don't know anything about hospitality. We're artists, not hoteliers. Let's welcome Brad Steward. It is my pleasure to welcome Brad Steward. Brad, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Welcome.
Thank you, Sebastian. I'm happy to be with you today.
Excellent, excellent. I'm curious, and this is sort of our default opening question. What is keeping you up at night these days? Let's start there.
Whew, a little bit of everything. I want to mention, because of the timing, the safety of our friends and family in Los Angeles is a big concern.
Sure.
And we're definitely keeping those people in our thoughts, people in the hospitality, the people in our lives, the family and friends. That's my big one right now. That's serious stuff. If you go to the other things, which I can actually impact, the things that I can impact, I think a lot about why our customer is our customer, why our fan is our fan, and how do I keep them engaged in the business, active. I also typically, I think last night, woke up thinking about our housekeeping staff. and I think about that team a lot, because they're so critical to what we do. And they really are they shouldn't be called housekeeping. They should be they should be called the people in charge of the first impression. Because they manage that a lot. And so I think a lot about them, and just am I supporting them correctly? And do we have our procedures in line? And are we doing everything we need to do? And, we've never had any issues there at all. But for the kind of operation we run, we have to contrast kind of two threads of DNA coming together to get kind of one good one. And that is a place that's cleaner and more professionally ran than you thought, and something that feels rustic and interesting. And the net result is kind of what I would call a rugged luxury experience. You know it when you see it, but it turns out actually to be a tricky thing to create.
How would you describe your property? I mean, you have quite a unique property, but to the listeners of this program, where is it located? How would you describe it? Share, I guess, the description of your property.
Yeah. Let me start with what it's not.
Mhm.
And what it's not is, it's not a glamping operation started by a bunch of people watching KPIs on the internet and seeing that people want experiential travel. My wife and I are both designers and artists. We work in the marketing world. We've been with companies like Adidas and Solomon and Patagonia. And the insight for our place came out of looking at talking to thousands and thousands of consumers all over the world. And when we would talk to them about the products we were creating, oftentimes it would dribble off into, well, I was wearing that jacket, but I went to this one place and I did this one thing and it was really incredible. And then we met this guy named Tony, and he's the third generation owner of the place, and blah, 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 blah. So we started thinking about what's that kind of place building. When we made the jump out of, let's call it corporate design, for lack of a better word, we thought, what can we do in terms of place building? So when I filter that through your question of describing what we are, I like to think of us as kind of something like a sculpture garden, something like a botanical garden, something like a retail display, something like a movie set, something like a hotel. We have brought all of these things together in a way that we feel is unique. Now, the property itself, the physical part of the property, is kind of mind blowing. It's under 1 acre. There are 11 rooms total. They are arranged in kind of a communal cloverleaf setting, which we believe brings people organically together. And essentially, we're a garden in the middle of a little city in California. What we think is kind of the last great old California city in Southern California. That town's called Ojai. There's around 5 to 9,000 people that live in the town of Ojai, depending on the time of year. And then every weekend, around 15,000 Angelinos and other people from all over the world come our way. We're sort of part, if you're coming from Europe and you're going to do that kind of common great American road trip where you start out in Venice Beach and you drive up to San Francisco and then you go over to Las Vegas and then you fly home. Ojai has become, in the last 5 years, one of the stops on that trip. So we have a lot of people who are just coming out of Los Angeles, driving up to Ojai, hanging out in Ojai. I always say that, if America had Spain, it would be Ojai. I have olives, I have wine, I have everything growing near me, citrus, anything you want. Avocados are a dime a dozen, in town here. And so that's kind of the physical environment that we're in here.
The last great Californian city. I mean, I need to double click on that, right? Like, how do you define that? What makes it the last, I guess, great Californian city?
Great question. I think there's a few things that are the ingredients of that.
Mhm.
Number one, no freeway into the city.
That's a
So
big one. That's
is
a
that's
big
a
one.
huge one, and you could get into a whole urban design discourse there, which I'll spare everyone. But if you start in San Diego and you drive through every great California beach town, San Santa Monica, Venice Beach, Malibu, so on and so on and so on. And Malibu's a little different because Highway 1, you could argue, isn't, at least it offsets its disruption with stunning beauty. Uh, but Ojai has no major freeway into the town. We're a valley, and we're a little bit unique, and the only other valley that actually is really like us in Southern California is Napa Valley, and the reason is simple. Basically, from Mexico to Canada, all of the major mountain ranges run from north to south.
Mhm.
There are a couple of spots in California where they run east to west, Ojai, Napa Valley, and so on. So we have all sorts of unique phenomena because of that. Ojai is known as the Valley of the Moon. That was the meaning of the Chumash Indian word. It's called the Valley of the Moon because when the moon comes up and moves through the sky, because of our east-west orientation on the mountains, we never lose view of the moon at night. It's bright as can be on a full moon from the start of moonrise to moonset. And so I think those ingredients make it really nice. It's very walkable. We have a law in town preventing chain businesses. There are no McDonald's, there are no Starbucks, there are no Taco Bells.
And
Now,
this is regulated by law?
regulated by law, regulated by the city. No Home Depot. If you want something, hardware store wise, you go down and you see the guys who've been running the hardware store for 50 years. And then I'll quickly add, 2 feet outside of the city limits, there is a McDonald's, a Starbucks, and a Taco Bell, and they've gathered on the border and done their thing. But inside of the city of Ojai, it's kind of mom and pop business. Actually, not kind of. It is mom and pop business. Many people make their living here as kind of a traditional merchant, or in my case, an innkeeper, if you will,
Mhm.
an innkeeper in the way that you would have in San Clemente in 1955, or some other era or some other time. So those are the things that I think make us the last great town. The other thing is a little bit of a behavioral component. Ojai is Hollywood 2.0. There are many, many, many celebrities in town. No one in town cares. They're seen as people who have a job working in an industry which is called the film or music or entertainment industry. And so you'll have funny little things like, oh, I went to the cafe today, had a cup of coffee, and bumped into Mick Fleetwood. Oh, okay, great. What's he doing? Teaching his grandkids ukulele. Oh, yeah, they go to, there's a small amount of schools, so they only go to the school that our kids go to. Okay, great. You have a lot of weird little things like that that just happen in town, and nobody really cares, and I kinda love that.
That is awesome. It sounds to me like your city is not a stop, it's a destination, right? You need to want to go there. It's not going to be on a road that you pass through and you just happen to get gas and a donut or something.
Yeah, you do not find Ojai, Ojai finds you. And maybe that's another attribute of kind of classic California in a way, but, I grew up in the area surrounding Sedona, Arizona. When I was a child, Sedona was a dusty little town, being born and raised in Flagstaff there, my main memory is my mom saying, "Please, don't take your new shoes out into the red dirt because it'll stain them for the rest of your lives," kind of thing. And and then one day I remember my dad, who had his little insurance office there in Sedona, coming and saying, "Hey, get this. There's a guy who's gonna, move in next door to me in the little mini mall there, and he thinks he can sell rocks for a living. That's kind of interesting. He's got these crystals, and he thinks he can make a store out of it, and that's kind of strange." And then, boom, 1 year later, the guy with the crystal shop owns not only the entire strip mall, but has kicked my dad out of the space and taken on the whole thing. And Ojai kind of reminds me of Sedona before everything hit, and it has kind of that magical place element to it. It finds you. You're on the internet now, or Instagram or whatever. You see something about Ojai or Sedona or some of these other special places. They kind of find you. So I think that really makes Ojai pretty extraordinary, pretty rare.
I must say, I need to add it on my bucket list. I mean, clearly you sold me. That's for sure. You called yourself an artist. You called yourself a designer. I mean, by profession, or you've done it, for a major corporation. How does that transpire in your property? You equated it a little bit to a garden, to a sculpture. Is that what, as a guest, you should expect at that property?
Well, the dirty secret is I'm not very good at anything. And so because of that, I've had to kind of lightly master many skills. I've been a film director and directing TV commercials for comedy for children, music videos. I played kind of a seminal role in the creation of the sport of snowboarding. I was one of the first professional athletes in snowboarding. Then I launched several brands in the snowboarding space. And, part of the epiphany of starting the Outpost was one day I was talking to somebody and I realized that at the ripe old age of 50 at that time, between the ages of 13 and 50, I had never made a living from anything else other than standing up on a piece of wood and sliding down the side of a snowy mountain. And I kind of thought, I live within a bubble within a bubble within a bubble. I'm in sports. I'm in a limited number of athletes. I'm in a sport that is a bubble inside of other larger sports. I should probably see what's going on in the rest of the world at about 50 years old. That was a little bit of the spirit of designing the Outpost. Really, one of my main inclinations was create this like a movie set and make it feel like that feeling you have when you walk on a movie set, where things are in a particular place. There are what I would call 5 or 6 hot spots to the design. And a hot spot to me, or an epicenter of the design, is 1 or 2 locations or 3 or 4 locations on the property that really highlight what you do best. And the idea, and this kind of came from my wife and I's work in the apparel world, was answering the question, what will our fans give us credit for? If you look that direction and you see something amazing, do we get credit for that? And so, and is that part of what emotionally ties them into the place? And then further to that, I'll add maybe another layer down for my wife and I, rather than having somebody build that, can we do it? And so my wife launched a whole series of apparel she designed as part of our hospitality brand. We believe apparel is essential to our brand. So that immediately just makes us different than every hotel out there. My wife discovers that avocado seeds, when you extract the liquid from avocado seeds, they create a beautiful organic pink dye. We dyed a bunch of stuff pink that matches this thing called the pink moment that happens here in town every day with the sun setting. And boom, you've got a connection to the land, to the location, to a product that you can purchase and so on. And a lot of people, when they come to our place, they say, "Hey, this is kind of like it's kind of like a brand I'm living inside. It's not really like a hotel." And I love that. And then the last thing that I'll add is, kind of one of the highlight days for me at the Outpost was we got a phone call from a network and production company. We would like to shoot some episodes of The Bachelor at the Outpost. Everybody's talking about it. We hear it's an amazing spot. We'd love to do it. The director walks on site, looks at the location, and says, "Actually, we don't need to do anything to dress this location." And I thought, that's incredible. Having worked in the film business where, in some cases you have millions of dollars and, 9 different people, running around with bolts of fabric and 3 different looks and furniture and on and on and on and on. They literally said, "We actually have 0 decoration here. We're good. Let's shoot." And to me, that was really, kind of a great feeling and something we've kind of tried to master. And, like I said, I don't wanna make this sound like we came at this with this, genius idea and this roadmap of how to design and direct this thing. We built it by hand. We looked at a lot of things twice and tore them down and then built it up again and so on and so on and so on. And I think we tried to leverage what we don't know. And in general, I would say my wife Sean and I, and Sean is really, the significant creative driver, I think, of our business. We looked at it and said, well, how can we leverage what we don't know? We know what we like. We've been a lot of places. We've traveled the world, and we know what it feels like to be in a really great space. And how can we make that here?
That's amazing. So, what did The Bachelor do to your business? Is it now a wait list? Like for somebody wanting to stay at your property, do I have to subscribe and maybe I get picked as a lucky winner? I'm curious. No, I'm serious. Like I'm curious.
Oh,
Has it?
that's a great idea. Yeah, that's a great comment. We've had a really interesting business. We've been open for 10 years. The first 7 or 8 years of our business, you did have to book many, many months in advance. And part of that was a function of just being small. The other part was there aren't any other businesses in the city of Ojai that the New York Times is saying, "Hey, here's a top 5 or 10 thing you must see in California." There weren't many other businesses that, when Goop makes their list of favorite things and we're on it, that drives a certain amount of traffic. COVID, like everybody, COVID hit and changed the rhythm of how people travel. What we did see in the past was we're going to plan a year and a half in advance to come to the Outpost. Okay, we don't have rates open a year and a half down the road, but we'll take your name and number and somebody will be in touch with you in 6 months. Now what we see is those key beautiful dates, the traditional times that people want to stay in Ojai, they book out way, way, way in advance. And then the remainder of the week, usually the weekdays, the remainder can be pretty spotty. Every once in a while, 7 people from France will show up on a Wednesday. We heard about this place. We read about it in an in-flight magazine on our way over. We didn't know we were coming here. Ojai is still, to my earlier comment, Ojai's still emerging. If you walked down to Venice Beach, grab somebody hip who knows what's going on, and you said to them, "What are the 3 places you want to go to next weekend?" Well, I'm either gonna hit Joshua Tree or Anza Borrego. I'm gonna maybe hit something around Temecula or Julian to have a little bit of wine, and then I'm going to Ojai, Santa Ynez, maybe,
Okay.
maybe.
Okay.
That it's on the list. Now, if you go into, let's call it corporate LA, if you go into corporate LA, where are you going? Well, Terranea, Santa Barbara, or
Mhm.
Pismo. So there's kind of a layering there. We have 2 restaurants in town that we also are small investors in. My wife and I will go in on a Friday night. There's no locals. We don't know anybody from there. It's packed. It's called Rory's Place. It's
Mhm.
been fabulously successful, and the owners, not my wife and I, the owners of Rory's, Rory and her sister Maeve, they're responsible for driving the success of that business. And but you'll have weekends in town where it's like the locals kind of shutter the doors and 5, 10, 15,000 people from LA have a good time, and then on Monday everybody crawls out of their shed and starts the traditional town up again.
So you're on a 48-hour diet, and then you can go back, about your business.
Yeah.
You said something that was very interesting. The pace of booking has changed during COVID, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what do you mean by that?
This sound crazy, but, as I often say, on almost any phone call I do around anything, I'm giving myself the permission to say a few stupid things, and so having that permission, here's what I think has happened. I think behavior around travel in total, not just related to the outpost. I think behavior around travel has actually radically changed. Before, I think that people had certainty. No one is sick, especially in our area. No one is ill. There's no pandemic coming. There's no natural disaster or fire or anything out there. Let's book a year and a half in advance. Now, I feel like, and keep in mind, the America that I live in is more or less 100% blue. Now, the uncertainty, the general uncertainty of our customers and kind of the foundation that they operate from, I feel has kind of destabilized in the last couple of years. And so travel's thought about differently. And so I see kind of this weird thing, but it actually checks with all of my experience in design. And that is about 51% of the equation is totally rational, and about 49% of the equation is completely irrational. We're going to book at the last minute, but we're going to spend 3 times what we would normally spend because we're here, we're going to do this now, and we're going to have a blast.
It's difficult to control. It's difficult to plan for the 49.
It's very difficult to plan for, and then again, being a kind of a brand guy, one of my more controversial beliefs in the brand space is that if you lead the horse all the way to the water, they will never drink. You've got to get them about halfway there. Your brand needs to deliver about half of the aspiration that something magical, meaningful, and memorable will happen at your location. And then actually the rest has to happen to them. And, I saw this directly in the sports world happen in kind of a wonderful way. Never in the entire history of Adidas was there a page in a marketing deck or a design brief or anything that said, you know, we should find 3 guys from Queens who know how to rap, and we should put them in our shoes and have them sing a song called My Adidas by Run DMC, and we'll launch a global campaign off of those 3 guys. So can somebody go out and just kind of hunt for those? Or never at Nike, would you have ever seen, I know this guy playing basketball in college. His name's Mike. He's pretty good. He's not the best in college. He's pretty good, but I think we could launch a $5 to $10 billion brand off of him. His last name's Jordan, so we could call it Air Jordan. And I think we could do that. No, things happen. Nike gets into basketball. All of a sudden, the guy slam dunks it from the free throw line, and Peter Moore is there sitting on the sidelines to watch it and says, "Wow, hang on." I have an idea. I got a thought on what we could do there. So I kind of like to get people halfway there and then let them build the rest of that memory on their own.
I don't think it's a controversial comment at all. I was, as you were talking, I was listening to you. I was remembering a conversation I had with my 11-year-old son, and we were talking about. He asked me how to kiss a girl, and I'm like, "Don't do it the whole way. Go halfway. Approach her, and then wait for her to come." Right? I don't know whether that's the same thing. It has nothing to do with branding, but it has
That
about
that's
connect.
beautiful. That's beautiful. That is a better example than my example. A one-way kiss.
You can't kiss someone. Like, you don't do it. You approach her and you basically show her that you care, and then let her make the last step.
All right,
right?
Sebastian. I know I'm the guest, but I'm actually stealing that.
That's all right. That's all right. That's
I'm
right.
actually stealing that from you because it's the perfect thing, and here's where I see that it's controversial, okay? Because this is what I hear, and usually, I'm a contrarian for hire, a lot of times when I'm at speaking events, but usually what I hear is, well, darn it, we've just got to have a tech stack that understands the customer journey so we can get them in the funnel. And then here's the problem with the funnel. Aunt Sally goes to Ojai, California, a town you've never heard of and never been to. And Aunt Sally went there because her friend Judy told her about it. Aunt Sally calls you and says, "Hey, have you ever heard of Caravan Outpost?" No. Well, man, it's right up your guy's alley. It's so hip. It's so cool. It's fashionable. I met this guy there who scored the movie Chicken Run, and he was sitting around, whatever the thing is. That's a true story here, actually.
You scored the chicken run. I
Yeah, the
mean,
movie, yeah,
yeah.
true
Okay.
story. And, Aunt Sally shows up, and she's not on anybody's customer journey, she's not in anybody's funnel, but she actually turned out to be the driver. She sold the room for you, she sold the experience for you. We kinda have 2 rules for how we think about this, kind of 2 thinking constructs, and one is that if you hear about the outpost from a friend or family member, it beats any marketing we can buy. So we try to do everything we can to influence it. Yeah, and by the way, none of these are genius or require any high level thinking, but it does change the way you operate. So if you can hear it from somebody else, that's better. If they're a loved one, that's the golden piece for us. And then the second one, which is kind of an old saying that's been around sports for a while, is marketing is what you do when you run out of good ideas. And we do believe that a little bit is, when the good ideas stop, when it starts to just not be interesting or compelling, or if there was no magic moment, or if you air kissed, to use your story, and there was nobody on the other side, you stop going and you stop doing it, and then you got to market the damn thing. And we try to stay out of that as much as we logically can, knowing that in a world of kind of attribution model dynamics. I went to Instagram, I talked to Aunt Sally, then I went to your website, then I went to booking.com, Expedia, and a bunch of other travel agencies. Then Aunt Sally bought us a gift certificate. Then we used the gift certificate and we called you directly. I mean, that's your journey. And how do you attribute for that? You can't. You just have to put the good energy and kind of be everywhere your customer needs to find you.
Going back to your description earlier, that's still the 51%, though. That's not the 49%.
Yeah, you're still in that 51. One of the things we think a lot about, kind of going back to the top a little bit of, what are the things that keep you awake at night? I'm kind of bothered in a way. About 70% of our customers are women. I think that's a fairly traditional number for women in travel, booking the people who actually click the buy now button.
The decision makers
Be
are
the
women.
decision maker. It's like fashion. Fashion, women purchase at about 5 to 6x, depending on whose stat you're looking at. But in our little world, women are 70 to 80% of the decision making piece. And I look at kind of all of the tech stack and everything, and I wonder, did a bunch of dudes put this together for women? And if it, because just having a bunch of daughters who are all educated, technically savvy people, I think, how could this all look different? Why do men run the interface that actually the customer is women? And what would that look like? And how would it be different? Would it be more luxurious? Would it have a different look and feel? And certainly if I'm designing a wallet for a male customer versus a female customer, totally different products, actually same function, but totally different product. And so that's one of the things I think a lot about is there a way we could tap into that and do something really interested? I'm not interested in your journey and all of that stuff. What I'm interested in is learning your behavior and how I can create an unfair advantage for my company because of something I know about how to create a fan for my business.
And adding to that is who you actually are, because you started with saying, 70% of our bookers are female, right? Are women, right? Like accepting that as a truth and adjusting your, I guess, selling approach, your marketing approach to that is what matters ultimately.
Yeah, yeah, and it's part of, getting the business question right, and one of the business questions for the outpost at the beginning especially was, if you don't know anything about hospitality, what do you know about? Well, we know consumers. We're in the market with multi-billion dollar brands. We're traveling, I don't know, 15 times a year back and forth to somewhere in the world, totally exhausted with jet lag and dizzy, but we're doing it. So, you wanna have proper ramen in, Tokyo, we got the spot. You want the best cheese in France, we'll take you to the little spot in the Haute-Savoie next to the hat shop. Whatever it is, we have that kind of specificity, and you have to build that specificity in a global brand. You have to know, in Nashville, in that alley, the door with a polar bear sticker on it that says, "Do not knock," is the best speakeasy in town. So you've gotta you have to have that specificity to really be a decent designer and somebody who kind of understands culture, and so I think a lot about, how can we be customer experts, fan experts? I'm using the word customer and consumer quite a lot, but actually, I like to think about building fans. I'm not sure I know how to build a customer in hospitality. I do know how to build a fan, somebody who will advocate for you, and tell others and so on. I think we are pretty good at fan building because it's our universe that we came from. And so that's a big part of the construct of the business. How can we leverage what we don't know? How can we remain experts in consumer behaviors and buying habits? And then the hospitality stuff from our experience has been kind of like Groundhog Day every day. It's an ops manual. It's a group of people who are super smart, that run it. They're better than we are at it. And, we try to enable them to run it.
Fantastic. There's a couple of things that I want to go back to housekeeping. We mustn't forget to talk about housekeeping because it's something that you mentioned earlier at the beginning. In our research, we found a quote in Forbes that Caravan Outpost is a place big hotel chains should be worried about.
Yes.
Why do you think that's to be the case? I mean, beside regulation, clearly you have a city that works in your favor that is going to keep, I guess, the big brands from opening a property in your town.
I think they should worry about us for a few reasons. They should worry that I think my wife and I have a very valuable insight. We didn't create it, we're not the masters of it, and I say that with total humility, actually. But we had an insight 12 years ago that where you've been is more important than what you own. And that insight gathers in our mind how we build this hotel. Where you have been and what you have experienced is becoming more important than what you own. We saw it in sports because I'll take the sport of skiing and snowboarding. If you go to Nanshan outside of Beijing, or if you go outside of Seoul and you go snowboarding or skiing, all of the gear is rental gear. It's all best in class. You don't have to own it. You get on the train in Beijing, you go to Nanshan, you walk down the little chute there, they set you up with all of your gear and you go. You have excellent product, best in class service, a beautiful experience. You don't need to own any of that gear anymore. So for people like me who are in the position of saying, well, average net selling price for a pair of skis is snowboard is $569 and lifetime value is $112,832.15 if they learn to do our sport before they're 11. If they learn in college, it goes down to $28,432.08. You get out of you kind of get out of all of that. And so I think what the hotel should kind of be worried about is my wife and I have taken on this personal charge to launch a location out of that. We're consumer marketers. The reason I think they have worry in that, by the way, is when you ask me what's customer service, I never once sit there and think, well, it's a checklist of amenities. Their little basket in the room is handmade and has homemade chocolates in it. Ours will be even more handmade and even chocolatier, or, it'll look even greener or even more eco or whatever. All that's kind of just lost in the wind to me a little bit. Or, if they have a certain brand of conditioner and shampoo with as little type as you could put on a plastic bottle to actually communicate what it is, we'll have even less type and it'll be in Swedish, and that'll do it. That's our upgrade. So I think they should be worried about that. I think they should be worried about the consumer. And maybe that's the ultimate answer. They should be worried about Sean and I in the Outpost, they should be worried about what's happening with the consumer. Behavior's changing. What we saw through the 90s, 2000s, and so on was sport was the major driver of fashion, the major driver of cultural influence. You have Michael Jordan, LeBron James, you have Tom Brady, pick your favorite A-Rod, pick your favorite sports star. And that's kind of our universe and the lane we're in. So you also got to keep that in mind. But, those were driving major trends, multi-billion dollar businesses. I think 2005, the first generation growing up as digital natives, a little bit of Gen X backlash. I don't need to own all of this garbage. I just need to go to cool places. And you saw it if you looked into it. Well, hang on a minute. So there's this guy called Anthony Bourdain that every male from 40 to 60 has some affinity to. They watch him. He's cooking, he's experiencing things, he's going places. Okay, great. So yeah, Anthony Bourdain doesn't talk at all about what he owns. There's no, it's not lifestyles of the rich and luxurious that Robin Leach used to run through the 80s and 90s. It's Anthony Bourdain getting down and dirty in the alleys of Hong Kong or Phuket. Okay, cool. That's different. So I think that customer aspiration has changed. And what I've seen amongst kind of our competitors in this space is, they've called us and said, wow, you kind of played a role in inventing glamping. That's unbelievable. You've been around for 10 years, planning it for 12. Wow, you guys kind of invented glamping. And we kind of filter that back and we think, well, we've never once thought about playing any role in inventing an activity. We're all about the consumer. Our consumer, I'm selling to the same consumer I started selling snowboard gear to when I was 19 years old. And that consumer is the urban adventurer. It's a person who lives in an urban environment. Typically, they work in a cubicle or a tech role or an entertainment role or something that is a role that generates a decent income to be able to travel. They're inspired by the outdoors. They identify as an outdoor person, but typically they don't work in that environment. And so they buy brands like Arc'teryx, they buy cars like Volvos, they buy Audis or, what have you. But that kind of profile of the urban adventurer, it's the same customer. I'm just selling them a different product now, a different experience.
And to identify them, the critical question to your point is more, where have you been versus what credit card you own or what house you own or what's your net worth. Is that fair?
You got it. You got it. And this is why I say the big hotels should be worried about the customer, because probably one more generation and we're much more like Europe. Most people live in apartments. The quote unquote American dream has been rewritten.
We rent or we own?
Yeah. And so I think this overall mentality, call it 1950 to 1990. I need to own my space. Call it 2000 forward. Why would I want to own my space? That would be a horrible use of my funds and my thinking. It's a little bit like first round of software. You got to own the desktop version. Second round of software. Not only do I not own anything, the stuff I use isn't even with me. It's in a cloud. It's sitting somewhere else. And why is it in a cloud? Because what's important to me is mobility. That's what's important. The ability to go to other places and see other things.
You said that there was sort of a change in 2010, right? Driven by technology. What did you mean by that?
I think there's a loose bracket, like call it 05 to 015 to 2015. There's kind of a loose bracket. I do think technology was the driver. I think the impact of mobile computing is just radical. Even today as I, text with my 87-year-old dad, and I think that changed a lot of things because it untethered your imagination. It untethered you physically. Certainly the burners came on it with COVID, and, whether you believe work from home is valid or invalid is irrelevant. All you can do is just acknowledge that there are a large portion of jobs that don't require a physical location or a commonality between people in their physical location. And so I think at about that era, you just had the first group of consumers coming into being who began to shape a different set of values. I don't want to own things, but I want access to them. And you started to hear, terms in fashion like accessible luxury and things like that. Those kind of became buzzwords a little bit. I can't buy all of the Vuitton set, but I can get this one or two pieces. Or I would even posit that there was like a cultural mobility that even came on, that we saw in fashion, where kind of the old European fashion houses today are filled with hip hop and rap talent. And that cultural mobility, in the 90s, early 2000s, classes didn't have the ability to move that freely. And now there's a lot more mobility. Still a bunch to fix in the world, to be clear. But there's a lot more mobility. And so I think there's a lot of change that happened there. So the big watch out to me is, I've had a few conversations with very large hotel chains. Many people have tried to purchase our business over the years, all of them with flags. I always get off on the wrong foot with them because they immediately say, "Well, hey, we really love your brand. We'd like to add your brand, to our stable." And literally, I have had meetings where I've said to them, "Can you explain to me what a hotel brand is?" Because language is important. And my definition of a brand and your definition of a brand may be different. And if they are different, we're off on the wrong foot. I bought and sold a few companies in my day, and these are the kind of very specific, before you kiss, you got to go on a few dates, to
Mhm.
use your
Mhm.
analogy. This dating period is pretty critical. And I kind of come away from a lot of those meetings thinking, well, Marriott or whoever, I don't want to single out a brand, but whoever the brand is, they have labels. These are labels that are kind of sewn onto a product. But in terms of a brand, the aspirational piece in the way that I know it from sports and outdoor doesn't exist there. I don't know anybody that lives or dies for Marriott or lives or dies for another brand. Now, I do know people who participate in the loyalty piece. To me, I really wonder where that will go on the long, 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 long curve, because as part of where you have gone is more important than what you've owned. There's an overall devaluing, I believe, of transactional relationships happening. And so these old devices that worked, well, if you came to our place a bunch of times, if you flew on our plane a bunch of times, even though you don't maybe like it all the time, but if you did a couple of million miles, we'd give you this little gold card. Now, talking to our guests, talking to my kids who are, sitting in their 20s and doing stuff, "Hey, I found a cheap flight to Iceland on XYZ Airlines, or Norse Airlines is going LA to Reykjavik
Mhm.
for 219 one way. See you later."
There's no loyalty anymore.
Well, there is loyalty. It just shifted. The loyalty is, I am loyal to the fandom. I'm loyal to the activity, not the brand.
Interesting.
I'm loyal to that. I'll go to the ends of the world to experience what I want to experience, but I don't care as much about what brand I do it on. In fact, if I'm going to Marrakesh, I'm digging online. I'm finding a riad. I'm meeting the guy in the alley, 2 a.m. with a big backpack. I'm gonna feel a little bit scared. I'm gonna walk through the catacombs, come to the riad, and it's gonna be incredible.
Do you think that Caravan Outpost could exist outside of your current location?
I
In a
do. Yeah. Yeah, I think it needs some tweaking. We started the company and we said, well, we should start kind of a copy and paste business,
Mhm.
and we should be able to copy and paste this into other cities and it should work. You always have to localize. We actually looked at that and said, well, localization means actually starting at the cap table. And, without going too deep into the construct of the company, we said, if you really want to be part of the community, you actually have to be part of the community. You have to build a local cap table so that people really know what's going on. You're not just coming in and, oh, great, new hotel is here, and we know the pathway for that. Every 3 years, you got to remodel the spa, and then you get some influencers in and they talk about it, and your business, you know does that. And that's the hotel world. And, the battle is to not become jaded as you ride the seas of all of that. That's not our world. What we see is, we feel there are 10 to 15 epicenter cities in the world which really determine what's happening, and they guide the larger trends. And then underneath those 10 or 15 are kind of second tier cities, if you will, and those second tier cities are ripe targets for us. So we might not be in London, we might be somewhere else because of the rates of London or whatever. Or if we're going to come in London, we're in the bad real estate. We're in the place that the big chains aren't gonna, they don't go down that alley or they don't go in that place, and
I hear Bethnal Green is a good place for that,
a great
or
example. Yeah,
yeah.
great example. Maybe one way of thinking about our fans, the people who come to our place, we have a name for them. Sometimes we refer to them, Sean and I, as 50/50 customers, 50/50 consumers. Half of what they own is brand new, purchased on more logical basis. The other half is tried, worn, true, secondhand, got it from grandpa. Aunt Sally gave it to me. Looked really cool because the corner on the leather was sort of torn and I had it sewed by a guy named Mario, who's a shoe repair guy down on the other side of the river and downtown where the, train stop is. People want that kind of 50/50, and I just don't see, when I go into what I see as these kind of what I call, corporate craft hotels, where it's the big chains who, they've all heard of Liz Lambert and they've all walked through the Ace and they've said, well, anybody could paint a bunch of flowers on the wall. We can do that. I know, our interior designer has resourced us 15 people who can paint, cool flowers on the wall. And, maybe if it's a little edgy, we'll do a mouse with X's in their eyes or something like that. That feels edgy, right? Everybody, dead mouse on the painted on the wall. That's cool. Yeah. It's just a different.
What's next for Brad Stewart? What are you working on? I mean, you must be working on something.
Myself, first of all, trying to be a better human every day. Better father, better husband, better everything, better friend, better kid to my parents. So I work on that. I work on that daily. Really, what we're working on is trying to find a good partner for expansion. We've had part of the story of the outpost has been, I don't want to say making errors, but not being careful or as deep in due diligence as we probably should have been on choosing kind of some primary partners. That's been a challenge for the business, and so I think the next step for us is finding the right people, the right capital, the right behavior, the right mindset, the right goal, if you will, to the brand. Finding the right people and expanding with some purpose and some intention. We already know the concept works. You don't come into the business, stay here for 10 years. We've been the number one rated hotel for almost in town here for almost every year we've ever been open. And we're never more than 1 or 2 points away from the Ojai Valley Inn, which is a 5-star luxury suite ran by a family that, has hospitality in a multi-generational configuration in their family. And so I think it's really about finding the right partners. It's also about identifying the right cities. Really importantly, I think it's about understanding what renewal looks like. The concept has to be fresh. We got to keep it going. We got to keep changing with our fans and giving them kind of what they want and a combination of what they know they didn't want or didn't know they wanted. And so but really finding the right capital partner and the right person to expand with. We believe, and this is one of the things, go back to my comment about glamping.
Mhm.
Tons of people call me and, hey, we got property in Utah. We got 35 Airstreams. We got a cool logo. We're ready to go. We're ready to go. We've seen you guys out there making tons of money. Well, first of all, nobody in glamping is making a ton of money, but, the second piece of it is, I just kind of say to them that's not our model, actually. One of the difficulties we've experienced, and it was a real eye opener and a learning lesson for me. And, part I got out of my day to day in snowboarding to go learn more and kind of give a little more depth to my knowledge. One of the things we've learned is that oftentimes we're in the room with developers and land people, and we're from the fashion business. We might as well be speaking Inuit in these in in these conversations because we keep saying to them, "Hey, our history is, from our kitchen table, we popped a $30 million apparel brand in snowboarding, literally sitting around the kitchen table with a new baby and a couple of bucks in our pocket." We owned all of it. We launched it and grew it successfully and got it in the hands of Solomon and then later Adidas. Partnering with them, they owned it, so on and so on. So newsflash, Caravan Outpost is kind of a clothing brand that happens to have a hotel. We're kind of a retail store you can sleep at. I mean, they look at us like we're crazy. And then We come out of those meetings thinking, okay, the positive is we have one less chain to compete against. That's the positive. They think we're nuts. They'll never jump into this the way we're jumping into it. Check the box. One less brand to compete against. The negative is, boy, it sure would be nice to have a few $1,000,000 to get another location going. Our customers are there. I'll give you a couple of quick stats that are just kind of inside baseball. We have 11 rooms. We have a little over 60,000 people in our email database.
That's amazing.
That's astonishing ratio. We have some months where over 90,000 people visit the website. So we get a lot of
So let
traffic.
me ask you this.
Yeah.
Why not partner with a fashion brand? Because that's not unusual. That happens.
That was our original concept actually is, hey, let's go find our friends at the North Face or Amer or Arc'teryx or, especially in my case, I participated in the Solomon's purchase of Arc'teryx. So we know these guys. But just as I said, when we get into these rooms with the hospitality developers and everything, and we start talking about highest and best use of real estate, which I can't think of any place that's interesting that has highest and best use. The Notre Dame is that a great example of a highest and best use? I don't know. Is the Eiffel Tower the highest and best use? Is almost anything you've seen in Spain by Gaudi the highest and best use? I don't think so. We get into those conversations and that gets tricky. Then we come to the fashion guys, and we say to the fashion guys, hey, we have an idea. Bang, Caravan Outpost, da 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 da. They're like, wow, this is amazing. First thing is, let me grab somebody. We'd like to book a retreat for our creative team at your place. So we've done Vans, Lululemon, GMC, Cadillac, Hyundai, Prana Yoga, Tinder, Match.com, you name it. We've done
There.
brand, NBC Universal, whoever. So first thing is, wow, this place looks cool. We're booking a retreat. See you in March. Okay, great. Now, we don't know how to operate a hotel. We don't know anything about this space. Looks like an amazing idea, Brad. We see you guys have had a couple of interesting hits in the past, and that all looks good. Can we just marinate on this, for a couple of years and see where it's going? Whereas if, to me, the obvious thing here, and it's happening, with Amangiri and guys like this, these are just handbags you sleep in. This is just the Hermes hotel. You're just sleeping in this kind of folded in luxury kind of thing. It's coming, and it'll happen. And probably the first piece, not probably, what is already happening, the first piece will happen at the top tier of the market, and it'll be the luxury brands having luxury hotels. I'm already getting decks pretty daily showing me the, pick your favorite fashion brand hotel. It'll happen at the luxury level. And then I do think it will probably come our way, which is we're not priced like a 5-star hotel, but we're a pretty expensive 3-star hotel. And so I think that next layer of consumers will come for us there. But you're asking people to crawl out of their spreadsheets and fashion, and unit economics of 10 million larges, 15 million mediums, and 20 million larges. You're asking them to kind of crawl out of that unit economic place and say to them, all right, people want to wear your products, and people want to come to your product in a different way. Actually, they want to wear your hotel spatially, not just physically, or they want to wear your brand spatially, not just physically. It's a little bit of a tricky concept to talk with. If North Face opens an adventure hotel tomorrow, everybody will say, oh man, that's obvious, and we've been talking about that for a long time. We had a lot of discussion with REI. They didn't get it at all. And then the cool little store down the street from them, Evo, went out and launched Lodge. It's something that those bigger brands are going to miss. It reminds me a little bit, what's happening in footwear right now. A good friend of ours started Hoka. Hoka was an idea that was shopped around and seen as a really bad idea. Are you kidding me? These chunky shoes. And our friend Jean-Luc shopped them around, went around everywhere, started going to races for 5 years. Hey, I'm telling you, there's something about these chunky shoes that is an advantage. And there are people out there who want to buy them. No, they look ugly. Okay, I'm telling you, in golf clubs, there are big golf clubs. In tennis, there are big tennis rackets. In every other sport, there's a big example of design. Hey, Jean-Luc, you're nuts. Go back to teen in the mountains and hide. Boom, Deckers, a challenger brand who didn't have a prayer to succeed with the brands they had on their roster. They take a shot. I had dinner with Jean-Luc a few weeks ago, uh, heading toward 4 billion, 3.5 billion in revenue for Hoka,
That's amazing.
and then you're reading in the press, Nike says, "Well, we don't know what's going on, we're not sure what's happening." Well, I know what's happening. You were worried about Adidas stealing $20 billion of revenue, but what's happening is on Cloud and Hoka and these smaller brands are stealing 5 billion at a time, and that's what's dragging you down. To go back to your root of your question, what's Marriott got to worry about? Little people like us with big ideas who don't. We're not going to start another Marriott.
Yeah.
You're never going to drive into a Caravan Outpost and go through the rotunda with the overhead drive-through thing like you do probably at a Marriott. But they've got to worry about people like us peeling 2, 3, $400 million of customers off of the adventure travel segment. And if there were 2 or 3 of us that were doing that, next thing you know, you've got kind of like $1 billion of value that evaporated out of the market.
Before we wrap up, I want to ask one question, which may be completely left field. How do you spend your day off? Right, like you need to recharge at some point, right?
Oof,
There's a
I
lot.
never do. I try.
Okay, that's fair.
I tr
Possible.
I try so hard. I was up till midnight working on investor presentations last night with my
Okay.
wife. You know, anytime you get the 11:30 at night text that says "I love you," you should stop working.
Okay.
So I am kind of that guy. I do that quite a lot. My number one free time activity, I have 2 of them. One is being with my family, my daughter and my wife. And then secondarily, I'm the only guy I know in my neighborhood who does my own yard work. And
Wow.
and I believe nature is my gym, and I regularly have people roll through the neighborhood and say, "Hey, do you have a card? I need some stuff swept up and some trees trimmed." And I'm out there with every piece of industrial equipment you can imagine. And so I'm really big on being in the yard. We live in downtown Ojai. We've got a little over an acre of kind of something that looks like the outpost that's our house. And I'm really into plants and really into gardening. I do get out and snowboard every now and then, not as much as I used to, but I'm still 100%
Mhm.
100% in, and I'm happy to report that all of my muscle memory is intact, even if the muscles aren't there. They know
How
which
did they hurt a bit more, right?
yeah, they know which way to move, and
Mhm.
those are kind of the big things. But I do have there's a therapist that I could probably spend a few $100 an hour on talking about why I work so much, but I do really, really enjoy working, and I love the business we're in. It never really feels like work to me. I'm pretty passionate about it. It's pretty authentic to who I am and what I do. They're actually pretty linked.
You started with snowboarding, so you must have a favorite mountain or a favorite run that I'd love to just wrap up with. What is it?
Uh, whew, well, my favorite run is always the next one I'm going to do. That's my general
Okay.
orientation. Is my favorite run is that next one that I'm buckling in for. And
Mhm.
and and so that's probably hospitality actually is my favorite run in that regard. Places I've been to in the world where I felt small, insignificant, and a part of a larger ecosystem where I had zero control. Myself and a few other people went to Russia. We were the first Americans to snowboard in Russia in the very, very, very early days of snowboarding. We got dragged into the Caucasus on Russian troop transport helicopters, and this was freedom and perestroika and those kind of things for people over there was sort of pre that, which is now post that. But we spent a lot of time up above Gudari in the mount, or up above what was then Soviet Georgia, Tbilisi, up in the mountains at a place called Gudari. That was mind blowing and absolutely surreal. And then I think almost any time you're in a helicopter in Alaska, you're having what I call a once in a lifetime experience, which as an athlete means 2 things. Means I only did this once and I died, or this was so frightening I might not come back. And so I've had some pretty incredible experiences there. But my nature is when you've done it for a living, when you're on the snow, call it 300 days a year, like I was for many, many years, 300 plus. When you're on the snow, you do get to this place eventually where you're like, "You know what? I'll ride anywhere with anyone on any day, and I'm gonna have fun. I don't care." And I always say people, it's like the old NBA basketball player who walks by the court and sees a ball roll over to him from the kids, and they pick it up and shoot it, and they make it. That's the phase I'm in. You wanna go snowboarding, you got a mountain, you got a ticket, you got a place to go, and there's some snow.
There's no bad snow. You just
I'll
got to
take
do
that.
it.
No, no, and we used to say in our company, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad
Mhm,
gear.
mhm.
Maybe there's a parallel somewhere in hospitality, I haven't thought about it, but, maybe there's no such thing as bad experiences during travel, there's just kind of bad service and bad, poorly executed hotels, I don't know, maybe there's a parallel there.
Yeah. Brad, thank you so much for your time, for your insights, for sharing your stories. It's been an absolute delight to talk to you. We probably could have gone on for another hour or so, but I'm conscious of time and I'm conscious of your time. So I added your place to my bucket list. I can't wait to see you gardening in your home, I guess. And I'll go find you. I'll track you down.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sebastian. I appreciate it, and I come to you via our technology partner with Cloud Beds, and they've been a key piece of teaching us some really interesting operational pieces and kind of learning how we manage our business. And you can only operate like we are, where you're kind of risking what you do with a consumer. We're a little bit like trapeze artists, and we're flying through the air, and you got to have a safety net. Cloud Beds has been that safety net for us, and so we're thankful, and I'm appreciative that, somebody pulled me out of their Rolodex on a lucky whim and gave me a few minutes to speak today, so
No, appreciate that. Thank you so much, Brad.
okay, thank you, Sebastian.
That brings us to the end of yet another episode of The Turndown. Huge thanks for all of you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Of course, this podcast wouldn't be possible without the amazing team behind the scenes. A massive shout out to the producers, Paula Carrero, Linda Pejai, Lana Cook, Ricky Sherman, and Ailey Fakuhasen for the incredible research and pre-production work always keeping us on track. To Paulo Sanchez, thank you for your stellar audio editing and for making us sound so good. And finally, thank you to Ying Liu for her organizational talents and keeping the season on schedule, literally. Remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow us for updates and bonus content. Until then, take care and stay curious.